Alrighty, so the first question was Luke with Paul? I really think, that day one in chapter 27 is the first two verses. And it says, we. That would be Paul. I mean, that'd be, Luke writing. When we would sail for Italy. And we put out to sea. The next day, we put into Sidon, in verse 3. So I think that, I believe that Luke was there. He was the one who wrote this letter. And it's getting to the end of the letter. And there's a lot of things that happened. One of the verses 1 through 9 is they're leaving Caesarea and they're going to Sidon and then to Myra. They change ships and head for Cnidus. Trouble with the weather takes them to Crete, and then first to Salome and then to Fair Havens. And this part, the first 9 verses, take about 6 weeks. So I just wanted to kind of read that out so we got that information. So the companions, the people that were with Paul was Luke. Let me see, I lost my little spot. Aristarchus, the Macedonian. I'm going to call it Artie. It's just easy for me to say that, from Macedonia. And it was interesting is that in order for them to have gone with Paul, they would have had to have been made slaves. That's how they would have been able to go, because they would have to be slaves of Paul's. So,
So we have a prisoner with slaves.
a prisoner with slaves, yes. But see, the thing is that he is a Roman. You got to start thinking about him now, not as a Jew, not as less than, but he has rights as a Roman. So even though he is going, he's not executed. We got a little ways before that happens. So he's going as a Roman citizen to Rome eventually with his slaves. That's how that would work.
Is Luke a slave?
Probably so. Probably made a slave for the purpose of being able to go. So, I mean, it's, some of this stuff is so complex when you start getting into this. There was, and probably Trophimus was also there. That comes from 2 Timothy 4:20. He was also with Paul in the riots that were mentioned in Colossians 4:10. I'll write those verses, 2 Timothy 4:10. I'm just gonna write this down. 4:20. I have my notes on here and not in here, which they should have been there. Colossians 4:10. And then where's the third place I lived? Philemon 1:24. These are all kind of cross references to who went. Who went with Paul? So the whole trip from verses 1 through 9 is about 6 weeks. The travel. And what happens? They're supposed to go to one city, but what happened? Weather.
Storms too.
And that resulted with them landing in Crete. Okay. So let's just read those. It was decided that we should sail for Italy. They proceeded to deliver Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. That's the other thing we want to say. Julius
the centurion. And they said that there could have been as few as 4. I did make note of that. The cohort could have been as few as 4 men or up to as many as 600. Probably was not that many. One of the other things that I looked at was what would be the average number of people on a boat like this? Would be about 275 to 300 men.
Wow.
Would be on there. Okay, now this would include the crew. This would include all of those people, okay? But Julius, the centurion, probably had soldiers with him. And we don't know how many for sure, but we know that there would be soldiers, okay? So the pilot is called the master of the ship. And the captain would be the owner of the ship. That is how you would kind of understand who would be talking. These prisoners, the fate of the prisoners would be just a few different things. They would either be gladiators, then they would be fed to the lions. Remember, we're in a very tough time. Or, let's see, fed to the lions or executed. So there's no hope. Gladiator, you're gonna die. Fed to the lions, you're gonna die. You're gonna be outright executed. That's basically what's going to happen to the people that are with them, okay? To all the people that are on the boat. So Paul actually speaks 4 times in chapter 27. Isn't this interesting information?
Yeah.
You know, it's like, when I started looking all this up, I was really surprised. I did not, I guess, it's too much Hollywood where you think, oh, there's, women and children and, no, this was a military ship taking prisoners to Rome for either execution, be a gladiator, or being fed to lions. So, the only hope, if you became a gladiator, you better win every time until you die. That's it, So,
It's a much bigger ship than what I thought it was.
well, it doesn't mean that they had a lot of room. Don't think modern. I mean,
Not so much that it's big, it's just crowded.
there's got a lot of people on it. They'd have a lot of people working in the galleys below, rowing, people trying to keep things clean, people trying to prep food if they had any food at all. I mean, there'd be a lot of people sitting on the deck with nothing to do, chained up, ready to go to their death. I mean, that's basically it.
Was Paul chained up?
I'm sure it was. I'm sure.
Even
it
though
was.
he was a Roman.
Yes, but he is a criminal, but he's a Roman criminal. That's why he's going to Rome. And it would be, the Jews stoned people to death. The Romans were much more merciless. You know what I mean? They crucified you, or they fed you to a wild animal at the Colosseum, or they did horrible things to you. And this is also during the time, I don't know if in 27 BC, Octavius became Augustus. He became the first Roman emperor. Okay, so there are 5 generations. Okay, and before that, so it was a Roman Republic. So they elected through their Senate who would be the first man of Rome. The election was once a year. So you could be first man for just a year. You were running the country or the Senate for that year. I read a really good book on a guy named Gaius Marius, who was about 100 years before Augustus, about 100 years before him. Up until him, the only people who fought, there were 7 classes of society in Rome. The bottom 3 classes were pretty much either slaves or very poor people, farmers, whatever, but it was the top 4 classes that were the ruling classes. So the very top class would be the senators and the people that ran the government, and you'd have very wealthy people and just different, whatever. So he said, whenever they went to war, that each person that fought was only in those top 4 tiers, because the other people, they considered them nothing. Well, if you were gonna fight to defend Rome, you had to bring your own entourage, your own tents, your own slaves, your own food, your own horses, your own ammo. They had this massive numbers of people. For every one soldier, there'd be like 30 people following him to take care of all of his needs and set up his tent and do all this crazy stuff. And so they were victorious because they were systematic within a society where there wasn't a whole lot of systematic government, okay? They were more tribal, but they were beginning to have more and more difficulties. So Gaius Marius is the one who did 2 things, 2 major things. He was the only one who was first man 7 times in a row, which is never unheard of. It'd be like being elected to president 3 or 4 terms kind of thing here. A big deal. Anyway, he did 2 things. He had the soldiers, he said, let's use these lower level people, give them a chance. So if they were the 5th or 6th class, they could join the Roman army. So when they joined the army then had to take care of them and provide for them because they didn't have money to take care of themselves. And they did 2 things. They told them, you need to stay in the military for 20 years, which would be a feat to do that. At the end of 20 years, whatever area that we have conquered, we will give you land there. And then the other thing that he did is he had them build roads. So when they're going point A to point B, those were the guys. He's the guy that built the Roman roads all over Europe. And so he is the one who paved the way for people, for like Paul, to go through Rome in Italy and Spain and do all those things because that guy had that vision. But it changed the society completely. And so what happened was the other thing that they did is if you had a family and had 5 daughters and no sons, you could trade 1 or 2 of your daughters for the sons, if somebody else had a lot of sons, for their sons. Well, they would switch kids. So that would mean you can get married to your brother. Because the Octavians and the Caesars, the Octavians had no sons. They needed sons, so they gave 2 of their daughters to the Caesars because they have a lot of sons, and the Caesars gave them 2 sons. Well, they're like, hey, let's just marry them to each other, and then we'll just make sure that family. I mean, it was like the things that they did, and so there was no problem doing stuff like that in those upper levels. You just don't go like, oh gosh. So by the time it got to Octavian Augustus, he became the first emperor. There was a war, he actually took over everything, and they started a new program, which was whoever was going to inherit the throne had to be not only his son, but he had to adopt him as the heir. So you had to go through a special process. These guys had 2, 3, 4, 5, how many wives, I don't even know, and they had all these children, and so maybe the 3rd son of the 5th wife was the best candidate, so that would be adopted as his first son. And then that guy would become the next emperor. And that's how it happened. Nero, who was ruling at this time, was the first son of the 3rd wife, I think. I think that's how it goes. His wife manipulated circumstances to make sure that he became adopted as the next in charge. So he became adopted. And so Caligula, I can't remember the name, it starts with a C and I can't remember.
Caligula?
No. He was a warrior. I'll think of it. Anyway, Claudius. Claudius was his father thing. And so Claudius, Nero's mother murdered Claudius. And so Nero became emperor at 16, and his mother co-ruled with him. When he turned 21, he executed his mother because she was really messing with him. He married 5 or 6 times. It depends on how you want to count it. 2 of them were men. And he took he had a favorite wife who died. And he took that, found a slave who looked like her. So he eunuched the guy, had him grow his hair out, and dressed him like her and married her. I mean, he was a sicko to the max. He was
He's
crazy
the one
man.
that fiddled while Rome burned.
He's the one that burned Rome down. And actually, there was
That was Nero, right?
Nero.
Yeah.
Nero was horrible. Nero
Yeah.
was, he would light people on fire and burn them to death in his gardens. He did, I mean, he was just completely sick. And the result was that there was another, the Roman government was very unstable. And so that at the same time as that's going on, we have the Roman Jewish War that started in 42 or 44 AD, went to 73 AD. 1 million people died in that war. 10,000 Roman soldiers died in that war, and 250,000 Jewish soldiers died in that war. So it was a big deal. And that during that time, we've talked about this. This is when Paul is on the road bringing the gospel. I mean, we think we have problems. I mean, it's just an amazing picture of the stuff that was going on. And Nero was absolutely, by this time, insane. There was a revolt, and he thought that he was going to be killed. That he did not know that they had already stopped the revolt, and he would have been fine. But he had one of his guards execute him to make sure he was not killed by the enemy, and he would not have died. Of course, it was God that did it, because he probably would have wiped out the Jews completely if he'd have been able to. He was definitely a type of the Antichrist. Anyway, so having said all of that, it gives you a better idea of what would be going on. Okay, so it talks about where they go. They're embarking in it calls a Dramaton ship, is a ship that's in the port of Caesarea from the African coast, and they're going to Italy. So he's just talking about the location of where they're sailing from, like, out of Costa Rica or something, which was about to sail to the regions along the coast of Asia. We put out to sea accompanied by Artiscus of Macedonia and Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon. Julius treated Paul with consideration, allowed him to go to his friends and receive care. So he actually let him leave and get care before they went back. They put out to sea, sailed under the shelter of Cyprus because the winds were contrary. When they had sailed through the sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra and Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy, and he put us aboard it. Now, this is in Egypt. Somehow or another, they're over here to Egypt, and they were getting ready to go. So it's a good many days. Probably another 6 weeks. We're at 6 weeks here of sailing. And with difficulty sailing past it, we came to a place called Fair Haven. So we sailed under the shelter of Crete. They get to Fair Havens, and when considerable time had passed and voyage was now dangerous, since even the fast was already over. So they're fasting because of the Day of Atonement. So this would be September, October when this is going on. And Paul began to admonish them. This is really interesting, because at this point, I think they're 500 miles off course. Okay? So Paul begins to admonish them and said to them, "Men, I perceive that the voyage will certainly be with damage and great loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives." He's prophesying. But the centurion was more persuaded by the pilot, who is the master, and the captain, who is the owner of the ship, than by what was being said by Paul. So it is believed in verse 9 that verse 9 is the fast that happened October 5th, AD 59. That's when when somebody's bold enough to put a date like that, like, okay, well, maybe it is. I don't know. It's a dangerous season from September to November, and nobody even sails after that until after spring. Okay? So because it's fall, and we see that in verse 12, right? Because the harbor was not suitable for wintering, the majority reached a decision. That means most of the crew made a decision to put out to sea from there. If somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete facing southward and northward, and spend the winter there. So they're trying to figure out. So the first time Paul speaks, he warns them. Because of the weather. You know, the thing that's so interesting about that is that it is a difficult time to be sailing. So they'd already be worried about the weather. But he is trying to point out something here that they're just not getting, right? So a moderate south wind came up, supposing that they had attained their purpose, they weighed anchor and began sailing along Crete, close inshore. But before very long, there rushed down from the land a violent wind called an Aquila, or a typhoonic hurricane northeast wind. And when the ship was caught in it, it could not face the wind. We gave way to it and let ourselves be driven along. Now, I grew up sailing, and things like that, when they happen, if you try to fight against that, you gotta go down. There's no way that you can fight against it, because the wind is bigger and stronger than your boat. And people can be driven very, very, very far off their track, which is exactly what's happening here. Because the wind is just blowing them, and they have to let it run. And see, what is so interesting about this? These prisoners have a fate, right? Their fate is gonna be to die. And yet, what is it that they're doing?
They're wanting to survive.
They won't live.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think, people always look for hope. They do, even under very bleak and difficult situations, right? So, they get caught in this typhoon, and then we're gonna start going through the things that they start to do, okay? So, day one, what is the first thing they do?
They hoist the ship up.
Yeah.
Hurting, because they're afraid they're gonna run aground on
Right.
on the rocks.
Right. They could not keep control of the ship. So they strapped the ship to keep it from falling apart. That's pretty bad. Next, they drop an anchor to bring about draft so that they would not run into the reefs. Now that is done today. If they can get the ship to drag and get caught on something before it hits the reefs, they will be able to protect themselves, right? That's day one. Day two, throw overboard the cargo. Day three, they tossed the tackle from the ship. Some of them say they threw the armor and the protection gear over that they were carrying. Now, you know what they mean by tackle, right? All the
Extra
gear,
ropes.
all the ropes and stuff like that to be able to manage the ship. Now that's pretty desperate. If you've already got the dinghy ready to go, you're strapping the ship, trying to keep it together. You're dropping the anchor to force the ship to slow down in its rapid course. Now you're lightening the ship by throwing over the cargo, and then you're even throwing over the tackle because you can't get the ship to slow down. You can't get control of it. That's what's really going on. That's pretty terrifying, right? they cannot navigate by the stars. No stars to navigate by. So they don't even know for sure where they're going, right? So then they begin to, the result of this is they abandon hope. Because now they're starting to realize, hey, wait a second. This is not going well. Verse 20, from then on, all hope of our being saved was gradually abandoned. That means us, all hope of our. This is including the people with Paul. We're not going to make it. Verse 21, when they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up in their midst and said, men, you ought to have followed my advice and not to have set sail from Crete and incurred this damage and loss. Yet now I urge you to keep up your courage, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night, an angel of God, to whom I belong and whom I serve, stood before me, saying, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar, and behold, God has granted you all those who are sailing with you. So, Paul speaks. This was number one. Number two, basically said, told you so. But God will deliver. Now, I think it says something very important about what God said to him. You're going to die, but not here. Okay, that's basically what he's saying. You're going to get to Rome. I must go to Rome. Now, remember, they've already known that they're going to all be either executed, fed to the lions, gladiated. They're going to die. They all know it's going to happen. But he's saying, this isn't where we're going to, you're going to go with me. You know, I don't know if I'd be happy or terrified of that. Okay, so he tells them, take courage, be strong. And then says, Paul also says we must run aground on a certain island. That's so, you know, verse 26, we must run aground on a certain island. But now, the 14th night, that's 14 days after leaving Fairhaven. What happens?
They begin to see approaching land or surmise there is approaching land.
Yeah. Now, how they saw that, I don't know that it's really that clear.
Well, it could have been birds.
Well,
You know, and
but they took soundings. That
Yeah.
I knew as I was saying that they're dropping a weight to see that from 20 to 15, they're you know, it's getting more shallow.
so they didn't drop all their tackle.
They didn't drop it all. They must have dropped all the extra, but they had some, or they could have made some. I don't even know. I don't know how
Well,
they
there's
did
certain
it.
things that they would have had to have kept
Yeah,
in order to be able to just
right.
keep going.
That's right.
14 nights is a long time to be in that situation.
Yeah.
I was one time, my husband and I were up in British Columbia, and it was in July. We're kind of a long story, but we were on a private yacht, and we were crossing the Strait of Georgia, which the water is about 2,000 feet there, very deep, and when it gets really hot there, you get really, really, really high waves. And so it was 95 degrees, which people are dropping dead at 95 degrees up there. That's too hot. We had 10 to 12 foot seas. So I grew up sailing, so I'm very familiar with all this, but it's not just the height of the wave that matters, it's the distance between the waves. So if the waves are very, very close, what can happen, which is probably what was happening with this boat, and did happen with us, the stern and the bow are in the water, but the middle of the boat is not. So it puts stress on the hull, because we did get a cracked hull from that. And so when that happens, you've got to turn the ship in a certain way so that it runs So then you, instead of you doing this, like this, you're doing this. Okay, which they're both very difficult. I mean, it's like, you're doing sit-ups for hours and hours and hours, 6 hours that we were doing that. Boat behind us went down, Coast Guard's called, we could not save them, the Coast Guard had to save them. And, we finally got across to the side and, I remember something happened that they checked it and they found out that the hull had been cracked and we had to change boats. The Lance's boss had a yacht and he called them and said, bring me another boat, and they did. But I mean, it was a big deal.
How many were on the boat?
There was only 6 of us. It was a private yacht. And so it was no small thing to go through that. And I've been through rough seas before, but nothing like that.
How far is the distance?
Distance between the waves.
No, between
Shore to shore.
shore to shore, yeah.
Oh, where we were going, it was 6 hours to cross.
Oh, my.
So it was pretty far. It'd be going from like Victoria up to, one of the islands up there in British Columbia. I can't even tell you where it was, but it's pretty far. It would take you, if you were just cutting straight across, which you can't do because you cannot ignore the waves, it would probably still take you about 4 hours by boat to do it. So it was a good long 6 hours getting pummeled. But when I came downstairs, I came down into the galley and it was a nice ship. It had a living room and all that. And the entire kitchen, and we had stowed for weather because, there's a certain procedure for that. Everything was dumped into the middle of the floor of that kitchen and that galley. I mean, it was just like, oh, I was in there. My friend was in there. She's holding on to the sofa and she says, "It's a poltergeist." Oh my gosh.
Shove it.
Well,
That was an adventure.
Oh, yeah, it was.
Terrifying.
Going, living in Rockport area and going across Coconut Valley, you want it as smooth as it can be.
Absolutely.
And just a little wave, you're just gonna go on bang, bang,
Well,
bang.
it's shallow
And
there
it
too.
doesn't,
Shallow water gives bigger waves. Because the wind pushes it higher, deep water. Do you get a 10-foot sea in deep water? That's some serious stuff. Yeah.
but it's just as scary,
It
is
is,
all I'm
it's-
saying,
yes.
is it is very scary.
Take some out.
Because you can go across, we're in a little tiny boat, we're not in a yacht, we're in a
Right,
tiny
yeah,
boat,
yeah.
and it can get really frightening because weather, one day it's bright and shiny and everything, and 2 seconds later, here comes this black wind,
Right.
storm.
Right, that's exactly right. All right, so we gotta get through this, because I'm taking too long. I mean, because I just find this so fascinating, I can't help it. All right, they're close to land. And what does Paul say then? Paul said to the centurion and soldiers, unless these men remain on the ship, you yourself cannot be saved. So that's the third time he says, Paul speaks 4 times. First time, warning. Second time, told you so. Third time, stay on the boat. Now, I would think if I was a smart guy, I would go like, you know what, we're gonna listen. Right?
Steady.
Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it fall away. So they let go of the dinghy. Until the day was about to dawn, Paul was encouraging them to all take some food, saying, today is the 14th day that you have been constantly watching and going without eating, with having taken nothing. Therefore, I encourage you to take some food, for this is for your preservation, for not a hair from the head of any of you will perish. Having said this, he took bread, gave thanks to God in the presence of all, and he broke it and began to eat. All of them were encouraged, and they themselves also took food. So number 3, stay on the boat. Number 4, eat. You're gonna be preserved. So then, all of them were encouraged. They took food. All of us in the ship, who were 276 persons. When they had eaten enough, they began to lighten the ship by throwing out the wheat into the sea. When day came, they could not recognize the land, but they did observe a bay with a beach, and they resolved to drive the ship onto it if they could. And casting off all anchors, they left them in the sea, while at the same time they were loosening the ropes of the ruders and hoisting the foresail, and they were headed for the beach. But striking a reef where two seas met, they ran the vessel aground, and the prow stuck fast and remained immovable. But the stern began to be broken up by the force of the waves. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners so that none of them would swim away and escape. Really? Kill me now or kill me later, you know? But the centurion, wanting to bring Paul safely through, kept them from their intention, commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land. The rest should follow, and some on planks, others on various things from the ship, and they were all brought safely to land. Wow, that is amazing. That is amazing. Now, I just want to say something about storms, and before we move on. I can't use this, I'm gonna use this. So there's three, I would say biblically speaking, there are three kinds of storms. Correcting storms, Jonah. God sent a storm to break up the ship apart. Jonah confessed, the storm was because, and the storm was in direct conflict with Jonah's life. That's a correcting storm. A protecting storm, Matthew 14:22-33. Jesus took the 12 into a storm after feeding the 5,000 in order to teach them that they must rely on him and not on the miracles he does.
Protecting, is that what you're saying?
Protecting. And the third one is perfecting storms. Acts, basically the whole chapter of Acts. God was working out faith and Paul's response to the situation he faced.
What was the reference you gave for the protecting?
Protecting was Matthew 14:22-33.
What was the name of the third storm?
It was a perfecting.
Perfect.
Perfecting. I love that concept. Now, I just want to write just a couple of things here. All right. What did God want Paul to learn? Number one, he's trying to teach Paul, one, how to respond to storms. Let's do this. How do we respond to storms? Sometimes we call something a storm that actually isn't a storm, actually. I didn't even go there with this list, but. How to respond. And how not to respond. I think this is such an important chapter for that reason. Here's what not to do. This is the don't list. Don't listen to men instead of God. Don't listen to the majority. I'll tell you, he had a lot of pressure on him. Don't try to save yourself. Now that's a hard one. Because, nobody wants to die, right? We see this over and over again. This whole chapter is all about these poor guys trying to survive. Number 4, don't try to run from the storm. You're going to have to go through it. Do what you need to do. Number 1, seek guidance from the Lord. And from people, right? Have faith in his plan. And 3 is obey God. It's very important. Actions don't always follow belief. To know and believe is the fruit of our action. But how we behave is the fruit of what we believe. God's presence, he was in control of the situation. He was giving Paul words. Everyone arrived alive. These are all great examples of what God was doing. Storms are not always understood, so we must learn how to respond to them. God's love does not change despite the storm, and God is not in the storm. Remember 1 Kings 19? He's not in the storm, but he uses them. Okay, chapter 28. They have been brought safely through fall and winter. They found out that the island was called Malta. Malta in, I think, Greek means refuge. I love that. Alrighty. And what happened to them? What was the behavior?
For some kindness.
Yeah, they were very kind to him. What else happened?
He got bitten by a viper.
Alrighty. So,
There's a bad omen for the, as far as the natives were concerned.
yeah. And what did they say was wrong with him?
It was a murderer. Must have been a murderer.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, although he has been saved from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live. What did he do? What did Paul do?
He just shook it off into the fire.
And,
He lived. It's no hurt, no harm.
okay. But they were expecting, that he
We're
was-
watching him waiting for him to drop dead.
They're like-
Drop dead.
I got the feeling that he was like, no big deal. You know,
I'm sure
just
he's
shake
like,
it off.
While they were waiting for him to swell up and die.
Yeah,
so,
But that's what always happened before.
yeah.
right,
It was their
So
experience.
yes, that was their experience. So this had to be amazing to them.
well, and in addition to that, he's probably still got chains.
Mm.
They know he's probably still in chains.
Yeah.
They would probably have tried to keep them in chains. So, and there's how much, 276 men? A lot of them probably still chained up. So,
you swell with chains on.
I know, it'd be terrible.
Good.
But they probably thought, well, that's why they said undoubtedly he's a murderer. Oh, that's why. And
That's why he
so,
got bitten.
yeah, because he escaped God's judgment, but God's gonna get him anyway. That's what they're basically saying.
Right.
Justice is gonna get it. So the natives think Paul is a murderer. You know what's true? He was.
Yeah.
He was a murderer. And he can't avoid justice. You know, that's the easiest group. If you talk to somebody who doesn't believe in Jesus, if they are a very justice-oriented person, that's an easy person to talk to. Because they're very clear about right and wrong, except of course with themselves. But at least you have a basis to talk to that person. So the natives think that Paul's a murderer because of the snake. But nothing happens. And then what happens as a result of that?
And then he's a god.
Yeah. Okay, now they think, he must be a god. So they're really wondering what the test is now, right? So, verse 7. This is, I think, 3 days. It's been 3 days. Now, in the neighborhood of that place were lands belonging to the leading man of the island named Publius, who welcomed us and entertained us courteously 3 days. And it happened that the father of Publius was lying in bed, afflicted with recurrent fever and dysentery. And Paul went in to see him, and after he had prayed, he laid his hand on him and healed him. After this had happened, the rest of the people on the island who had diseases were coming to him and getting cured. Wow. They also honored us, another reference, I think, to Luke, with many marks of respect. And when we were setting sail, they supplied us with all we needed. Okay. So the 3 months that they're there, or no, I'm sorry, I skipped above there, or I should have gone. So Paul also, so he survives the snake bite, he heals the dad of Publius, and then he heals others. So the island, I looked up this island, and it said that the island was probably about 8 miles long and 4 or 5 miles wide, which meant that the entire population would come see Paul anytime. So what was the impact? How did this end up? What was,
They had respect and were given all the supplies they needed.
okay, so the natives respected and supplied all the needs. And who was that a witness to? Who would be impacted by this?
Well, the ship owner, the people that, the owner, the captain, the
Roman soldiers?
centurion,
Yes.
it's like, wow.
Yeah. I mean, I'd be paying a lot more attention to what this guy said. I would be very curious about what he's saying, right?
It kind of surprised me that the natives would do this in the fact that I was them, I would want him to stay.
But what do you think they didn't do that? What would be the reason? There is a reason.
Because they're all prisoners going to Rome and they didn't want to go against Rome.
And there were Roman soldiers there. They had an army there. I don't know how many soldiers there were,
Yeah,
but there were enough for them to say,
it ain't worth it. Let's get rid of
Come
that.
back.
yeah.
You're welcome, we're friends with you.
If you get out of this mess you're in, come on back.
Yeah,
We'll take care of you.
but they supplied them with all that they needed. Verse 11, at the end, right? Of 3 months, they set sail on an Alexandrian ship which had wintered at the island, which had the twin brothers for its figurehead. Gemini twins, Castor and Pollux, protectors of navigation, guardian of soldiers. That's who these two twin brothers were. They stayed for 3 days. After we put it at Syracuse, we stayed for 3 days. And then it says, when they were sailing around, arrived at Riga, and a day later, a south wind sprang up, and on the second day, it came to Puteoli. We found some brethren there, and were invited to stay with them for 7 days, and thus we came to Rome. Well, that is so interesting, I mean, really. So it's really interesting that the Roman soldiers, the centurion, were like, hey, yeah, go hang out with your friends. I mean, that'd be pretty amazing. The brethren, when they heard about us, came from there as far as the market of Appius and 3 inns to meet us. And when Paul saw them, he thanked God and took courage. You know, you think about how hard it must have been on Paul. You know, the responsibility, he knew his responsibility. He knew the impact he was making. He knew the call that God had on him. But it would be really hard to keep up it's hard to keep your faith up, right? Everybody's counting on you. I think about pastors that feel the heavy weight and load, leaders, deacons, people that are very public, everybody sees what they're doing, and they have a responsibility to uphold that and be faithful to what they're called to. But it takes a lot of courage to do that. It's not courage like we would call it, like, it's not bucking up and I'm gonna make it happen. But it takes courage to trust that God will make it happen.
And to stay the course. So we talked about Sunday, staying the course.
That takes courage, but it's not courage in my ability. It takes courage to believe. When, there's a longstanding member from the beginning of our church who's going to probably be passing away. They've been married for 65 years, lovely, wonderful couple. And we were kind of talking about that. I know I'm saved, I know I'm going to heaven, but the actual event of death is scary. I don't think anybody could say, oh, I'm not afraid. No, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen, what's going to be like. Even though I totally trust God that I know he's going to save me. If he's not going to save me, oh, well, I lived a good life. You know what I mean? It's like, at some point, are you committed? Where's your courage? So to me, the real courage of being a Christian is to walk in faith despite everything that you see. And he has spent some time, these last 2 chapters are difficult. And he knows he's going to die. And it would just be like, God, could I not have like some fireside chats for a couple of months with my buddies, just kind of hang out. I'm gonna die anyway. I mean, I'd be like, can I have a break? Right?
Yeah.
But that's not what God is doing. And I think there's a really important reason as to why. And some of that has to do with what we wrote down here about how to respond and how not to respond to the storms in your life. People are still watching him, right? So,
Kathy, have you ever been with somebody who is, like you're talking about, that is going to die, and how that they're really strong Christians, and how they do die? I mean,
I was thinking the same thing.
I mean,
usually it's
maybe
people,
It's peaceful. They're
I've
ready.
never seen, watching when my mother passed, a very good friend of mine that passed, I was there in the hospital with them, and it just, they were so, it's sort of like, man, I want to go like that.
Well, watching the families of those people, there is a difference.
There
The
is.
heartbreak of those who are not saved.
It's not that they are, they're still sad,
right?
because you're not gonna see
The
them,
measure of faith.
but they know that they're
Right.
gonna see them later.
Because they have the hope of the promise.
That's right, but
God.
the people,
Which is what Paul is talking
and
about.
Paul is like, man, I don't mind dying, this is rough, what I'm going through right now.
But the families of non-believers, they're gone. They're never, but they don't, I guess what they don't understand is they're
Nobody's ready.
still eternal.
They're still a child.
They're still eternal. It's just where your address will be.
Mhm.
So,
But I nevertheless, when you're facing that, God has to give you the measure that you need. He has to be the one to do that. And I think that is what is giving Paul the courage that he has. Because, we're not going through shipwreck and chains and all the horrible things and all these people that are coming to Paul and crying and, the burden on him must have been absolutely huge. And yet he continued to stay consistently the same. He did exactly the same thing that he did every place else that he had been. That is an incredible testimony right there. Because a lot of people, can't you see how tired I am and how hard this has been? Because it is hard, right? So, verse 17, after 3 days, Paul called together those who were the leading men of the Jews. When they came together, he began saying to their brethren, though I had done nothing against our people, the customs of our fathers, yet I was delivered as a prisoner from Jerusalem into the hands of the Romans. And when they had examined me, they were willing to release me because there's no grounds for putting me to death. But when the Jews objected, I was forced to appeal to Caesar, not that I had any accusations against my nation. For this reason, therefore, I requested to see you and speak with you, for I am wearing this chain for the sake of the hope of Israel. Wow. So, what is Paul saying? I am wearing chains. That's a very, very powerful statement. So, verse 21. This is amazing to me. They said to him, we've neither received letters from Judea concerning you, nor have any of the brethren come here and reported or spoken anything bad about you. But we want to hear about this sect, right? It is known to us that it is spoken against everywhere. When they had set a day for Paul, they came to him at his lodging in large numbers. And when he was explaining to them by solemnly testifying about the kingdom of God and trying to persuade them concerning Jesus from both the law of Moses and the prophets, from morning until evening, some were being persuaded by the things spoken, but others would not believe. So, Acts 23:6, he proclaims the hope and resurrection of Jesus. Acts 24:21, the resurrection of the dead. Acts 26:23 is the first to proclaim the light of Christ, and the hope is Jesus and the resurrection. So some are persuaded, some don't buy it at all. And when they did not agree with one another, they began leaving after Paul had spoken one parting word. The Holy Spirit rightly spoke through Isaiah the prophet to your fathers. Now this is, I think, really is important, okay? Go to this people, it's Isaiah 6:8-10. Go to this people and say, you will keep on hearing, but will not understand. You will keep on seeing, but will not perceive. For the heart of this people has become dull, and with their ears they scarcely hear, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their heart and return, and I would heal them. Therefore, let it be known to you that this salvation of God, which has been sent to the Gentiles, they will also listen. When he had spoken these words, the Jews departed, having a great dispute among them. And he stayed 2 full years in his own rented quarters and was welcoming all who came to him, preaching the kingdom of God and teaching concerning the Lord Jesus Christ with all openness and unhindered. Wow. So, he calls the leading Jews to meet him and tells them why he is there, right? But the Jews could not hear it. The chain that he was wearing was for the hope of Israel, and Israel would not listen. And of course, then he ends it with salvation is for the Gentiles. thought it was amazing, what he did, how he talked. Spending all that time preaching,
Spent a whole day trying to.
Yeah.
Show them.
right? So. We're at the end of this letter.
It's funny, all the way back in Isaiah. You rejected the gospel. Right, and here we are today, and you're rejecting it again. You deserve what's coming to you, basically. He's gonna take the message of salvation to the Gentiles and they'll listen. He has been taking it.
One of the things that I think is so interesting about this is that sometime at this point, I think I wrote down what year they think this is. Nero ruled 54 to 68 AD. I didn't write that down. I've written other dates down. But why didn't I write that down? I've got. This part of the letter was written before I went to Rome. And I wasn't in Rome for 2 more years. Seems like he was Rome for 2 more years. So this is 4 years before completion, I would say. Somewhere about 4 years before that.
So I had a question about the brethren.
Yes.
So in chapter 14, we found some brethren and were invited to stay with them for 7 days, and thus became Rome. And then in 21 or 17, the brethren. So are we talking about Christian brethren in
Yes.
14 versus Jewish brethren in?
The context is probably Christian versus Jewish, yes.
Yeah.
So 14 was, what did you say? Probably.
Christians, look at 14, where are you at? Gentiles, where are you looking at?
Yeah, in 17, it talks about the Jews.
Okay, what verse are you talking about, 14?
Where it says, we found some brethren and were invited to stay with them for 7 days. And the brethren, when they heard about us, came there from as far as Market of Apius and 3 Inns to meet us. So these were all Gentile brethren,
What verse were we at?
14 and 15.
Okay, thank you, I was like,
28.
of 28, I'm in chapter 14, I'm like, I don't see it.
Chapter 14. No, chapter 28, verses 14 and 15.
Yes, I'm sorry, yes. We found some bread, yes, and thus we came to Rome, yes.
So in 14 are the
Believers.
Believers.
Yeah. Yeah. Then there was the leading men of the Jews, these brethren. 17.
But yeah, I had it. When it asked the question about brethren,
Yeah. And it says in here, as I skipped right over, we found some brethren invited to stay with him for 7 days, and thus we came to Rome. So he's in Rome. So this might be 2 years before he dies. Seems like there were 2 more years in here somewhere. Because he wrote between 61 and 63, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. 63 to 65, 1 Timothy and Titus. 66, wrote 2 Timothy. And then martyred between 66 and 67. That's what I had. I think the chart, there's a chart that's in the back of your book on that kind of says that also. Whatever. I have that chart.
Talking about his Paul's,
Yeah, the books he wrote. I just looked at it this morning.
the books he wrote. Okay.
Yeah, it goes, it's that big chart.
Well, the sequence of events in
Sequence
Paul's
of
life
events. Thank you.
is page 115 in the In and Out book, anyway.
Yeah. Well, I wrote
That's
that
the one
down.
that I had a hard time finding.
Yeah,
I think
And
I,
I put it in the.
did I,
yeah, I
You
have
said
it.
that.
I pulled
Send
it out.
I sent a copy of it out to everybody. I mean, I think everybody has it, but just, sometimes it's hard to find stuff.
Well, I pulled it out to make sure I had it, and then I can't find it. There you go.
Yeah.
But the point is that we do have a pretty good graphic of
You want
when.
to look at it?
Thank you, you're so kind, because obviously I have no idea what I'm doing today. So, yeah, it tells us, Galatians. See. Yeah, it gives, what I like is it gives the dates. So it says Acts 28, 60 to 62, and the 63, 64, taken Roman in prison, 2 Timothy written. Yes, I was right, okay. So this is 4 years before he is executed, in 64. That's right, okay, good, that's right. I knew I had that in my brain somewhere. Okay,
No.
I'm so sorry.
Just the lady.
Big deal.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I want to ask you guys, what, does this feel anticlimactic to you? It's kind of like, oh, all right, okay, now we're done. Gee. But in a way, I kind of think it's good because the story continues in us.
Yeah.
We're still in Acts. We're still the New Testament. We're the Gentiles, we're bringing forth gospel. We're not writing any books of the gospel because nothing else needs to be written, but.
Did you feel a little relieved at the end when he's not in chains, he's on the ship as a prisoner,
Right,
and he's getting to do the final part of what God sent him to do.
he's writing letters and
Right.
communicating to people and
And he's safe.
he's saying.
Yeah.
So in the In and Out book, did it go